This program is produced using the resources of Public Media Network in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Learn more at publicmedianet.org.
Unfortunately, there's some static from a faulty microphone cord featured in this episode. Static is present at 11 to 15 minutes and 30 to 34 minutes. We're very sorry about that. Thank you for listening.
Welcome to Connecting Communities, a podcast about the environment where we live, work, and play. We talk with individuals from our community and the greater Kalamazoo area who have a positive impact. I'm your co-host, Patrick Hirschberger with Joe Byers.
Nice to be here.
Hey, Joe. Today we are joined by Monoform Cinema. Our guests are Gabe Ybarra, Jaycie McGruder, Steve Remenapp, and Carman Goodrich. Welcome.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for having us.
Well, I was recently at one of your productions over at Dormouse, and I'm a little ashamed to say this. It was my first one I've attended. You guys have been doing this for a minute, so I'm gonna slap myself on the hand. But it was really wonderful. It was the No Other Land, and as I understand, you were one of the few that had that in this region.
Yeah, I think prior to us showing that, it had only shown in Michigan, in Detroit, Ann Arbor, and Grand Rapids. Is that right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you want to show that? What was important to you?
It was important. I think one thing that I, or definitely we, take seriously is like, what stories are you putting on the screen? And I think it was important that story was told on a large size screen in a theater with people there in community watching it, and it wasn't picked up anywhere else in the city.
It was so powerful. I walked out after the movie, and there was a party that I hadn't seen in a minute, so we just casually talking outside, and I was like, well, how did you enjoy the film? And instantly I was like, enjoy the film. And she corrected me. She's like, no, it was I needed to see this. We needed to see this. Mm-hmm. And it was very powerful just to see up close and personal, minus the fuzzy pictures of damage done to people in their literal backyards.
Mm-hmm. So for folks that don't know, No Other Land is the Oscar-winning documentary that is about Palestine and the war. Well, you can't really call it a war because a war implies that there's two armies. Slaughter is more like it, but unfortunately I wasn't able to go to that. But tell us a little bit more about what Patrick was saying, telling stories and what's important to you all in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, we try to program films that we feel are important in one way or another, and they can be different in lots of ways, and No Other Land is an important film to see. We had a week where our normal May film, Come and See, was the same week as our first two showings of No Other Land, and both of those films are very hard to watch for different reasons, but they're both, I feel, important films. I think the co-writer of Come and See, it's directed by Ilham Klemov, but I forgot the writer's name, but had a similar statement about how there are certain films, about how no one would want to watch that film, but that was important that they did, and not all the films we see, or not all the films we screen are difficult to watch, but some of them are. But we just think it's important for them to have a platform, and with No Other Land in particular, there was a problem of accessibility where it wasn't streaming in the United States, and none of the theaters around here were showing it, and we were able to, and so we were glad to be able to do that.
One of the things I really found meaningful was, and I don't go to a lot of mainstream movies. I go to some here or there. I went and saw Sinners in the theater just because it's a gorgeous movie. I really enjoyed it. But I don't usually, if I'm going with somebody, it's with one or two people usually. I know that's my own personal movie experience, but it may feel intimate because you're sitting next to people you don't know, but it's in this big theater, and like the Dormouse by default is intimate. You know, like you're sitting really close to people that you may not know, but it's not a lot of people, but it's more than a few people. And I felt that was really utilized to your advantage of like sharing an experience with a film. Like you said, it's really hard, but meaningful, you know, and like things that we should be seeing. How did working with the Dormouse kind of factor in like how you want to show cinema that's important to you?
That is a good question. It's really, I mean, honestly, I think I'm still learning how to do that because it is an unconventional space for showing films. Something like Portrait of a Lady on Fire was like perfect in a church, which we showed in March. And there's also, you know, working with the existing sound system and some of those technical details that we do think about when like programming films now. But other than that, you know, we added a second like small screen during the pre-show. There's just so much space, and it's an interesting space to like make an event out of the screening. So like you're not necessarily just going there to watch the film. There is like pre-show and resources to learn more. We're gonna have performances in June before the screening. So I think like...
What's the screening in June?
We are gonna be showing Funeral Parade of Roses, which is a 1969 Japanese film, which is just amazing. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it.
I was blown away by the preview.
It's quite the trailer. Yeah.
Oh my god! I was like, I'm buying these tickets. I actually probably after this taping, I'm gonna go buy those tickets.
But yeah, I guess it has its challenges because it is unconventional, but at the same time, it opens up avenues for us to do a lot of interesting stuff, particularly with like our pre-show and presentation that we might not be able to do elsewhere.
One of the cool things about a church is that, you know, it's no longer a church, but it was intended to speak to people or to preach or to deliver a message. And so a building carries through with its theme if you are willing to use it. And I feel like this is definitely an option that you're utilizing. I'm sorry, you're in...
Oh no, that's such a cool way to think about it. I love that. I was just gonna say like they have such pretty lighting in there, and one of the fun little details is that during setup, because we're able to choose the color of all the lights, we're like, what are the vibes of this film? And we customize the color of all the lights based on the vibes of each film, which I think is just fun.
Yeah.
I liked, and you know, I think we might have talked about this before, just off camera, but how as the night progresses, depending on when, you know, what time of year you're there, even with the windows blocked out, like you do have different kind of natural lighting that plays an effect on it, and I found that really kind of a vibe check. How in the first part of it there was, you know, smaller short films that were going on the main screen. And then you had the secondary screen that was playing over by the kind of the concession area, and it was naturally a little lighter. But as the movie set in, it was still a little light, and then the lights kind of naturally came down to where it just, you know, got darker, and the presence really set in. So that the ambience of that theater, I think, just adds a lot just naturally to things.
Yeah, and just as long as we're talking about the Dormouse space, like my understanding is that. At least from what I've heard from Steve and Carman, is like we kind of sort of fell into it a little bit. But I just feel like for all the reasons that we've been talking about already, it's just worked out to be such a beautiful and perfect space. And I feel like as we've gone on, we've added so many nice things to it, like the pre-show stuff and you know, what we're going to be having in the next season. And like you said, Patrick, it's very like, you know, an intimate space. And that's why we're hoping in the next season to have like more formal discussion. Maybe we're very interested in like cultivating film community specifically in Kalamazoo, and yeah, bringing it back to what you said about the building following its theme there, I think if you want to call it our church to cinema, then I think we'd be happy. Yeah, we'll take that.
Well, we know we have that community here, right? I mean, like, I was lucky enough to be around when Alamo was, like, doing its thing. And, like, you saw people come out and all the different things that you can do with local cinema. I think that you're doing, on a smaller level, but it's really curated.
Yeah, I think that was an inspiration for sure, at least for me. Like, in particular, their pre-shows I thought were really cool, and we do pre-shows, and we've kind of made them into our own thing because they started, we were doing about 30 minutes before a film, we would have a curated pre-show that we put together, and then this season we started earlier, and they were an hour, and then we started doing 2 screens at the same time, so sometimes we'd have 2 hours, and then we would incorporate different things like, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. We had an artist come and do a live portrait drawing, and it's just been really fun to have that as just part of the experience, I think. And I think that building, Dormouse, is just conducive to that. And another inspiration personally, like, I played in bands in Kalamazoo in like the late aughts and early 2010s, and there was just such a great like house show scene at the time, and I think there still is, but there was something I remember talking to you, Steve, about like how I just loved the communal feel of that, and I was like, I want that, but for movies, and so I feel like it's fun to just have this kind of very community-oriented approach to film going.
How do you feel audience reception has been with the theme so far? And do you, kind of as a follow-up, do you like see interaction? I know there was some, after the movie, there was the option recently to like watch, kind of a short film after that, and then people mingled in various spots.
Yeah, I think people have taken to it. I mean, recently we've seen more and more people engage like with our pre-show, and it's something that we're getting used to because, I mean, I think it depends on the film and what we're doing for pre-show because a lot of the times we'll have at least some films up on our large screen, and we have a smaller screen that we also have films on typically. And sometimes it's, just people chatting and whatnot, and that's totally fine. I mean, that's part of what we envision for that, but we've been seeing more people recently just kind of like sit down and get really engaged with that. And yeah, our screenings of No Other Land was the first time that we did like an after show, and we told people ahead of time, like, you don't have to, you can get up and talk or do whatever you need to do, but we're gonna play this film and feel free to watch that. And we had people engage with that in different ways, and that was just really cool to see.
How do you think that the secondary screen will play like going forward for this season? Like, do you have any? And you can be vague about, how I don't want to like give away any secrets or anything, but do you see that expanding at all, or like what do you want to do with it?
Still figuring it out, to be honest.
How do people interact with it? Like, how has been the interaction so far?
So we didn't have a ton of choice. Like the pull-down screen was just there, but it's right next to concessions. So mostly what I have seen is like people go to get concessions, and then they're like, "Oh, what is going on over here?" And it's kind of like a little museum exhibit almost. Is how we have fallen into like presenting it, which I think is kind of cool. Like you can just wander into the corner of the space and be presented with like, oh, here is some like related, like really cool stuff. Let me spend, however long I want to spend watching this, learning about it, and grab my popcorn and go, go back to my seat. But it is like, I don't know, I'm really into like these little tiny experiences like that, and I think it's, I don't really see people hanging out and just like chilling and watching 30 minutes of it, but maybe that's not like also the purpose of
I was in line for a drink, and like I grabbed the paper with a description while I was waiting, so I was kind of like reading and watching. So I think that definitely served its purpose, you know, to like draw you in, you know, grab something at the same time you're closer to it. It kind of demands you be closer to it because it isn't such a large screen.
Yeah, and ideally it's like, oh man, I really liked or didn't like the feature film. I'm definitely checking out or not checking out the films on that small screen, you know?
Well, and what you're offering too, I feel like it has I wouldn't say it doesn't have broad appeal, but you are definitely looking for people that are searching for more. I don't know if does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, there are some folks who only want to engage with movies,
It's an
through
action
what
film.
Yeah, exactly, right, through like what, they come across in their algorithm or whatever, and, those aren't necessarily the folks that are going to come out for, these kinds of things. But, for the people who are interested, we want them to be like events where it's really worth coming to. And yeah, for people who really love movies, I think we pick a good, variety of like, there's a little something for everybody if you're a person that loves movies.
Yeah, and tying that back into the pre-show stuff, like I feel like, even if that is drawing you into coming to a Monoform screening, like you always get more than you bargained for with it, like with all the pre-show stuff. Like, Steve and Jaycie especially, like they put us like so much incredible work into putting those together on the second screen, and then the sometimes there's like a little handout of like other recommendations or related movies, like that kind of stuff. Like it takes a lot of work to put that together, and I feel like it is connecting in a way that is really effective and beautiful to see, and I get to benefit from it too. So
It's kind of funny. I was going back through some of the shows that you've shown, and it reminded me of my aunt. She was, oh my God, she was a movie person. Like Turner classic movies, that's all she watched, basically. And, it kind of reminded me of her doing that, and, just thinking of some of the actors and actresses from, like Debbie Reynolds and different ones. Yeah, so there's definitely a market for it,
they will take a TCM comparison. I appreciate that.
There was some good dialogue between those movies.
Yeah, well, the singing and dancing, and they could do it all.
Looking at your upcoming season, I know you're not giving anything away for a couple of weeks now, but can you give us some general thoughts?
We're excited. Yeah, we're excited. Yeah, I mean, there's probably a few things we can talk about, I'd imagine.
I think out the gate, I feel like we had a lot of heavier movies in this first half of the year, and I think the second half is going to be a lot more lighthearted. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're kicking things off with a little event series of 2 films. Because they'll be our July and August screenings. We're going to do a summer of camp. Without saying which films, there'll be 2 campy films. They're campy in different ways.
Are they campy known? Or are they campy slightly unknown?
I would say they're campy known.
Yeah, one of them is very much known.
One of them,
Okay.
One of them more than the other, but definitely both have their cult audiences, let's say. And so we're going to be incorporating some summer camp activities as well during our pre-show hour.
Do you have an arts and crafts table?
We're going to have an arts and crafts table, yes. We're hoping to maybe have some camp-themed snacks or refreshments of some kind. So, kind of more into the, making it an event as much as possible. And then, I don't know if someone,
We are going to be doing a David Lynch film. So one of the sort of quirks, I guess, is of our sort of partnership with Dormouse is that we do Well, we kind of decide, but we also need to plan 6 months ahead. And sometimes if we feel very strongly about a film, like No Other Land, or like last year we did the Kalamazoo premiere of The People's Joker, we are able to work with Dormouse and kind of get something else on the schedule. But with David Lynch's passing in January, was it? So earlier this year, we kind of had a mini tribute to him in some of our like trailer stuff. But we did not have the opportunity to like, you know, sort of do like I guess a monoform tribute in a way to him. So we'll be playing a David Lynch film as well, and effectively having like a David Lynch night, which I'm looking forward to.
Yes, and we'll be doing our first mystery movie, which will be a lot of fun. So you won't know what you're getting really until you get there. I don't know if we should say when it is, but I'll say that the timing for when it is kind of setting the vibes of it. I guess I'll say it is a Halloween event, so we're gonna have a fun special Halloween show for that. We're very excited about that.
Are you doing like a Thursday, Friday with it, or just a single day?
That one is just a single day.
Cool.
Yes. Yep.
So you come or you lose.
So exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We will have one event that is a Thursday, Friday, actually, which is we'll have a Thursday, which is our normal schedule is at least for this year is the second Thursday of each month is kind of like our typical film, and then sometimes we're able to have those other events like Steve mentioned, and so we're having a Thursday film in November that's related to kind of the event that comes the day after, which the event the day after, we're having a director from Chicago come in and show 2 of their films and have an in-person Q&A. And so we're very excited about that. And the film we're showing before then is one of their favorite movies. So I think it's going to be pretty cool.
That's great, and you're also like you're really making it regional, you know, with that introduction to that party. Do you have like any kind of like I don't want to say like genre, but like any kind of a vibe for what they're bringing?
For what the director's bringing?
Yeah. Is it documentary?
Queer films.
Okay.
Queer films, which we tend to program a lot of those, and yeah, I'm very excited for that. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
When you started this conversation, you know, before Monoform was Monoform, like, what did the conversation look like? Like, what brought you to kind of like talking about like we need this?
Yeah.
So like the lore, I guess, is so my spouse knows Carman from middle school, and we met at a friend's wedding. We talked about the movie Titan, like for 30 minutes, and we found we had like a shared love of movies. And then at some point, Elissa, my spouse, texted us both in a group and was like, "You should just do this, like, make it happen." So that's when we actually started moving. And it was like 6 or 7 months of work before our first screening, just because neither of us had never done anything like this before. So, you know, you have to pay for licensing of films, for example, to show them publicly. So you're not going to make a lot of money, if any. Typically, our events lose some money, and we've been fortunate enough to secure like some grant funding.
This is a passion project for all of you.
Yeah,
For sure.
which is super important.
Yep. I mean, Carman can speak to it more, but that is like where it started way back when. Was my spouse was like, just do it.
Yeah. And I think initially, like you and I, were just thinking like, at least for me at the time, I was thinking like, well, you need money because you have to buy building a theater and whatnot, and I had said like, my dream job would be like running a little theater. I spent time in high school at the Little Theater here in Kalamazoo when that was a thing, and that was very formative for me. And between not having that or Alamo anymore, just missing that a lot. And Steve is from the east side of the state where there's just more of these kind of like pop-ups or micro cinemas, and was curious like, why don't y'all have stuff like that in Kalamazoo? And I went to an event at Dormouse, I think in December of 2023, and I remember leaving that event texting Steve, and I was like, what if we ask Dormouse if we can set up a theater here? And we texted, and they said, let's do it. So.
Yeah, I think to your point, like Kalamazoo as an art city, like an art city needs a repertory cinema, it's just like, it was wild to me that we didn't have one here.
One of the things you both are kind of pointing out is what I find is like the challenge and then the reaction to that. We've worked with Trash Love Kazu for Earth Day stuff as well as just on the podcast, and it was interesting. He kind of made a Reddit post like, why is there so much trash in Kalamazoo? And they're like, what are you doing about it? And that's the response, right? It's like, what am I doing about it? And then leaping headfirst into it. And now, it takes the learning curve, what works, what doesn't, hard work. A lot of times what you're passionate about, you're not always going to produce a profit, but you're doing that for something other than, I think, a capitalist notion. I'm not saying there isn't capitalist results, but still, it takes you really getting your feet wet and attempting to do something for a community.
Yeah, and I think also as a transplant to Kalamazoo, it's been really, like that was kind of the idea from the beginning too, is we would watch movies, and it'd be like, how much cooler would it be if we could have like 20 people or 30 people, come and watch with us. And, people are turning up, and like Jaycie and Gabe are volunteering their time now. So, I think like the focus from the beginning has been like, can we like foster community this way?
Just to add to that, we've recently heard from a couple people who have told us that they'd never seen any of the films before seeing them with us. And I just thought, like, that's really special, because we're just kind of building that community where people are like, well, whatever you're showing, like, I want to see it. And that's just super special, I think. Yeah.
Well, that speaks, I think, to creating an event that people just want to come to. And then you curating that experience. I mean, it's amazing. It's kind of a burden, because you're like, what are we doing in this limited amount of time that we have? What's important to us. Do you see yourselves as activists? Like by bringing the films that you do. I mean, like, you mentioned earlier, you have a lot of queer-centric films. You have films that just focused on Palestinians. So to me, it speaks of activism on a level. Film is that, on top of being just art. How do you see that kind of shaping your view of how you move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think each person could probably speak personally themselves, but like, I remember last September, I think we showed Punishment Park, I believe it was in September. And when we showed that film, I was thinking about a lot and talked about like film as resistance, essentially. And you get it with all other mediums of art, music and things like that, and you get it in film as well. And I think, you can see a lot of our own thoughts and opinions come through in that. Not saying that, like everything is, in line with us, but I think it's important to show that, I think it's important to give platforms to films that are doing those kinds of things, you know.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think like there's no such thing as apolitical art, so we definitely feel a responsibility to have the films that we choose to show be something that we're proud to share in the community, and something that we feel is worthwhile to share with others
Spark
in
debate,
that context. Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, which is exactly what you all are doing.
In a world of shouting.
Post shows and, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in a world of where we all seem to shout on social media or whatever, that I think standing tall and just exhibiting, what you think is cherishing or at least holding some of your values is really important. Especially as either artists or art adjacent. I think some parties have gone towards more of a like what's polite, or what do I have for a general appeal to all. And I was watching some MTV videos from the 80s. I got on a couple of tapes. I got a bunch of wrestling tapes, and for those that don't know, I like VHS a lot. And there was these two MTV tapes, like they were best of the 80s. And there was a Michael Jackson video, but it was amazing how activism oriented it was, and I was shocked. Like, I was literally shocked. I could not expect to see mainstream music videos being that political. And that's only 25 years ago. And it feels different to feel that way now, but I feel that in a sense, we need more of that. We need to be more vocal in our artwork and reach more people if we feel what we're doing is right.
Yeah, I think film as a medium, not saying that it's any more effective than any other art medium, but there's something about if you hear a story from Palestine or Masfuriata, it's different than going to see No Other Land and see, a scene of children being evacuated from a school because bulldozers are coming to demolish their school in the middle of the school day. And it's just, being able to show something like that, it's just, it's, its own unique.
Well, so much of the media we see is censored, or it's a propaganda by those in power. I don't think in mainstream media you generally get to see, your neighbors shoot you because they're not giving you what they want for land, or kids at schools being bulldozed because it's part of an oppression campaign. It's just very real. I sigh a lot personally. That's how we relieve a lot of stress. But man, I sighed a lot in that movie. It was just so sad, but amazing because of the resilience of people in that oppression. We went with friends, and we were like, how do people do it? Like, how do you do this every day? How do you do this for a generation, multi-generation, in the face of that oppression, and still stand up and do it? And it was heartwarming, might be too strong of a word, but it was interesting to see the human spirit continue in those elements, and that was really powerful.
Yeah, I think there's an element to film, and we didn't have it planned out in May to have No Other Land with Come and See, and they're different films, and one is documentary and one is not, but they both have themes of just the importance of not looking away, I think, to just the atrocities past and present that have happened. And so, yeah, film as a medium just lends itself to a very unique experience for that.
One of the things I really liked about going to the show was the tactile nature of some of the paper items you had. I'm holding paper right now. I love holding paper, but it was interesting because you definitely had the facts about the film, and there seemed like a historical element to it. That there was that curation of the history. There was films that were in the pre-show that were really recent to very old. How is history important to you in making some of those decisions? like what you show?
I think history is pretty huge, especially with the No Other Land screenings. I was thinking at the first screening, like just watching the pre-show stuff, that like I think, again, shout out to the whole team, Steve and Jaycie especially, about putting this stuff together. Like, yeah, I just feel like we really did a good job of immersing people in the history of it, and just like, because the thing about No Other Land, you were talking about like the resiliency that you can see in that film, and like and the multi-generational resiliency, like you can see how long it's been going on, is the same thing you can see in those short films that we had in the pre-show, because they date back so long, like you really get to feel how long this struggle's been going on, you know, and it really, having it be the pre-show really sets the stage for, you know, No Other Land, which I think it starts out with footage from 2020, 2019 even, yeah. Mm-hmm. So like, you know, you have stuff from, it's decades and decades. And so No Other Land was like a huge one in terms of the, you know, contextualizing it historically. But there's an element of that in all of our, in everything we show as well, really. Like even, like we showed Watermelon Woman, I believe, was that our February movie? Yeah, that one, another, you know, once again, shout out Steve and Jaycie about getting together the pre-show materials. But for that one, we showed a lot of, on the second screen, a lot of silent film, a lot of black cinema, you know, from way back then. Because the Watermelon Woman, for people that don't know, is a 90s indie film by Cheryl Donier, who was like the first out black lesbian filmmaker. But the whole movie is about how, you know, the existence of people like herself is obscured, has been obscured, you know. And I think the movie does a great job of showing that and uncovering that history itself, but also just having that in the pre-show is huge to show that, like, yes, this has existed. This has been here for decades and decades and decades. You know, there's a lineage, there's a through line.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I agree. I love context. Like Gabe is saying, even for something that is like fun or lighthearted, which like The Thing, you know, we did in January, and we just showed a ton of like archival footage from like scientific expeditions to Antarctica, like historic, like old stuff, new stuff. I think like, yeah, it's fun to set context and like set the scene for the feature, and I will say thank you so much for noting the paper.
It's worth it.
I love like tactile, like here's a thing you can have and take with you if you want. It has more information if you want it. You know, if not, that's cool too. But like,
well, the casualness in the moment, you know, like, I mean, you're watching something and you're like, oh, I need to reference this. And you're not having to look at your phone, you're not doing any of that. It's curated for you in that space. I think that's really important.
Yep. Yeah, and I like work on a computer all day, and I found it very rewarding to like think about and help build with like everyone here a space where like you don't, you know, if you don't want to, you don't have to be on your screen for 3 or 4 hours, you know, like
literally turn it on silent for a minute and just like let it go.
Yeah.
We had a moment recently where our screenings of No Other Land, we had some representatives from KNOW, Kalamazoo, Nonviolent Opponents of War, and one of which attended multiple screenings and was able to give out more information about that and how to get involved. And just by the nature of like being there from several screenings, they got to see more of like the pre-show than normal because got to see it several times. And they mentioned like, how did you do all this? Like, and we're just, you know, I think maybe Steve was like, yeah, it's a lot of research. And they were just like, isn't it like a lot of work? We're like, yeah, thanks for noticing. It is. But it's worth it. I don't know. It's part of the experience, you know.
And I mean, it's definitely a sacrifice on some level, you know, of time and work, but I mean, we do it because we love it also. So it's really, I mean, it is also just fun and rewarding for us. Like we you know, have a group chat, and I remember watching some of the films we showed, that are from the 70s from Palestine, and being like, you guys gotta watch this one, it's so cool, and it just genuinely is something we all really enjoy.
Well, it allows your rabbit holes to be other people's.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
That's the fun of curation, though. I think, like I said, it can be a lot of work, but I mean, and for a lot of us, we go home or wherever and we turn on whatever streaming platform we have and we enjoy someone else's curation because that's their job. That's what they do, and they have, however many hundreds or thousands of people working for their platform. Whereas this is extremely local. Your own passions and a lot of free time that you're putting into that. But I mean, you do it because you love it.
Yeah, and I think like something I have found also rewarding is, speaking of like community and discussion before and after of these films, like people will come up to us and be like, have you heard of whatever? Like, oh, like I love this film, you got to check out this. And like a lot of times I have not heard of it. And so that has been really kind of fun also.
Yeah, and that's kind of our oldest like communal element that we've done, which is like, I think it was the week after we announced Monoform that the first event we did was Heirloom Arts, the tattoo studio, did their own Pride event, which is, they're coming up and doing that again this year, and we'll be there this year. But at most of our shows, we've had an element called Film Favorites, where sometimes it's themed around the film and sometimes it isn't, but we have slips of paper, surprise, that people can write down a film that they love and why they love it. And so our first event, a week after we announced, we were at that Pride event and we just had the slips there, so we hadn't even had a screening yet, but we're like, hey, write about a movie you love and why you love it. And that's just been such a cool thing to do, because like Steve mentioned, we find things that we hadn't heard of, and it's also just great to hear why people love, different films.
How do you see yourself working or growing out with the Dormouse and the expansion of what you're doing, or do you want to keep it where you're at for now, or what's your thoughts?
How long term are we talking here?
Well, how old is Monoform?
Technically a year and a half, because we started it took a lot of work to get to the first screening.
Yeah.
But as far as screenings, our first one was July 2024, so approaching a year of screenings.
I guess, what are your aspirations?
I'm gonna keep some private, probably. But I think, this is something we talk about a lot, actually, is like, it can be hard to plan forward because we're so new, one, and two, like the events do take a lot of work. So like, it also takes work to like get together and think about like, what do we want to look like in like a year or 6 months, I will say I love our partnership with the Dormouse. We always have way more ideas than we have time to do. But really, I don't know, anyone else can
I mean, I guess, like, I think that we really want to get ourselves established in the community, and, be a little bit of a Kalamazoo staple, maybe, So I don't think that we have any immediate upcoming plans for expansion or anything like that, not to rule it out in the future, but I think that, right now we're focused on building our little base and community of folks, and have just have that built before we think about anything in the future.
For sure.
Yeah, echoing that 100%. I feel like any opportunity to grow more, do new cool things, we would obviously leap at that or be interested in that. But yeah, just anything that we can do to be sustainable, to exist for as long as we can, that's what we're really after.
Do you feel the burnout? Like, how do you feel now?
Absolutely not. No burnout.
Yeah.
Not for me.
Well, you're doing something that's really unique. You know, nobody else is doing this really around here, so it's cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. It's, it takes a lot of work, and having more people involved just makes it easier, which has been great. But I remember after the first show, you and I were both like, should we keep doing this? I mean, we loved it. There was no question, but it was a lot for two people at the time, too.
I remember texting Carmen and saying, "Oh no, our movie's not fun anymore." Did we just make it a job? So there was some of that, and it crops up for me personally sometimes. But overall, no, I really am happy to be doing this. I find it fulfilling, for sure.
Yeah.
Finding that right mix is a magic.
Yes. Yeah.
Coming from someone who I do, I have a 9 to 5 or 8 to 4:30, whatever, and then on top of that, an art career, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of late nights and weekends that are just work weekends. But I mean, as an artist, I'm passionate about what I do, and I find a community element of that's entirely rewarding. So I feel like y'all have tapped into that, where it is rewarding. I mean, you get to see the effects in your community with what you're presenting. Those are really important. Those are important feelings and goals to have, especially I feel like we get so caught up in, or we're pushed the urgency of the greater world when we all live right here. And one of the things that I find really helpful, even on this podcast, is seeing, every other week how many people we talk to that are doing things here right now, and they're affecting our neighbors. Because we're all neighbors. We're in this, smallish Midwestern city. And we're affecting each other's lives, hopefully in a positive way, and that does take work, but it feels good. It feels good to do that.
Yeah, I find myself, especially pretty much after any screening these days, just being very reinvigorated, and obviously it can be a lot of work, especially leading up to a screening, and then you have an event and people are there, and even if one person talks to you, or we've had plenty of people talk to us. We've had people email us after a show and tell us what they think, or thank us for bringing a certain film around, and it's just it's amazing.
First show feels versus this last show feels.
First is in very first ever.
Yeah.
We have definitely more comfort and less dread about sort of running a very public event. I'm like, oh no, my mind is always like, what's good? A million things could go wrong. I feel more comfortable doing it. Still have a ways to go there. But also there is growing sort of excitement about what is possible too, because every show we do, we introduce something, we test something out, we're like, oh, that is really cool, let's keep going that direction, which is how we end up with 2 pre-show screens and handouts and et cetera, lighting. So I think for me, that is a big one. I'm just continually surprised at what might be possible with this medium of film screenings within this very specific church setting.
Yeah.
Not a church.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the lab. Every show is a lab.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's good, because I feel like that's how you don't stop growing. If it gets stale, then you're not doing enough to affect that.
Yeah, and I think to the idea of a lab, we are trying things out each time, and as far as first screening versus most recent screening, we've familiarized ourselves with the tools more, I think, in the lab. Like, there's still lots of new things to discover and to try out. But at least like compared to the first one, you know, from a technical standpoint, like we've figured that out a bit more, which is nice, and that helps to just things run smoothly, which is good.
All right. Well, tell us where people can find you and your schedule and all that kind of stuff. And any last thoughts?
Yeah, we have a website, monoformcinema.com, that Steve made. Great job, Steve.
It looks great. I like it.
And we're on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook. We have a Letterboxd HQ account, which we really enjoy having. And Jaycie has been doing a lot of work with that, which has been great. And yeah, so am I missing another one?
Talk about your ticket structure before we leave.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so we've just done kind of tickets on a sliding scale, which is we've only ever done $5, and if people want to pay more, they can.
And I think that that has always been the goal. Also, is like making it as accessible as possible to come see something on a big screen, have like come to an event, and as you said, we are not existing outside of sort of this like capitalist structure. So like we need to make a little money to be sustainable. Dormouse does, but like it was important to us to make the ticket price as low as possible, which is $5, and we appreciate everyone who can they decide to pay more.
So actually, before we wrap up as well, I would like to shout out our newsletter, because I think our newsletter is excellent. It's on Substack, and we have it linked in all of our socials. Steve does so much work with it. We all write for it, and I think it, like one of my favorite things about Alamo was picking up a copy of their like Birth Movies Death newsletter there. And I kind of think it's similar. Like we do a lot of pieces that are films like the films we're showing, or what this film means to us. And like I think our Come and See newsletter in particular, we did a lot of writing about why it's important to watch difficult films. And I feel like it's a really genuinely good newsletter. So you should check that out.
And that's available through...
it's on Substack, but if you go to our website, I mean, you can click newsletter and it takes you right to the link to subscribe, and then it goes right into your email if you do subscribe with your Substack. But it's very cool.
Yeah, and worth mentioning about accessibility, and we were just talking about that. I don't think we noted before, but our films, if you've never gone to one before, if subtitles are offered with a film, we run subtitles. So that was one thing that we heard from our community pretty early on, and that's something we've just run with. So
They always have the subtitles on.
Yeah, there you go.
It was really nice. I mean, speaking of like community like that, we got some feedback, and we were initially a little anxious because like typically when you go to a movie theater, they have open caption nights or something, but it's like very rare. And then we got like more requests trickling in, and we were just like, of course. Probably we should have been doing that from the beginning, but like we got good feedback, and now it's subtitles all the time.
That's cool. Yeah. I mean, I think it's always resourceful to have additional access to that, whatever it may be, especially, with a most recent film, No Other Land, I think that was crucial to the film and kind of just the understanding, regardless of the emoting that was happening on the screen. So I appreciated that. Thank you so much for all being here. I am super excited to go to